Hi, I'm Phil and I'm a late diagnosed autistic older adult. This video is part 2 of 28 terms and concepts that are closely related to autism. If you've not seen part 1 of this video, feel free to either click the link here to watch part 1 first or keep watching and watch part 1 second. The order doesn't really matter. Also, if you're interested in seeing more videos about my experience of being autistic and issues important to autistic adults, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. This lets me know that I'm not just talking to an empty room and helps get the message out to a wider audience by letting the YouTube algorithm know that people are interested in this topic. Before we begin, an important point to note. Autism is a spectrum of challenges and abilities. As such, no two autistic people will have the same experience or the same traits. Okay, let's dive in to part 2 of 28 terms and concepts related to autism. At number 16 on our list, we have the terms ableism and internalized ableism. Ableism is discrimination, prejudice, or systemic bias against people with disabilities. Ableism views able-bodied people as normal and superior to those with a disability. It defines people by their disability and makes the assumption that they need fixing. It is similar to other forms of oppression such as sexism and racism. Ableism can be intentional, such as mocking someone with a disability, or dismissing their abilities, or using inappropriate language to describe someone. But it can also be unintentional, born out of a lack of understanding of disability, or a failure to acknowledge the different types of disabilities that people experience. Some key areas where ableism can affect autistic people are treating autism as a disease that needs to be cured, the use of functioning labels to describe autistic individuals, treating all autistic people as if they have an intellectual impairment, saying phrases like, "We're all a bit autistic," or "You don't look autistic," describing autism as a burden or suffering from autism, referring to someone as inspirational for doing typical things. The list could go on and on. Internalized ableism refers to the negative messages about autism that individuals turn on themselves. This is the result of experienced mistreatment over time. It can manifest as self-doubt or low self-esteem and a sense of being less than neurotypical peers. It often leads to masking to try and blend in and to try and hide the autism. The autistic person may tend to blame themselves for every miscommunication, or if someone else is unkind, or if something goes wrong. Internalized ableism might mean the autistic person does not seek accommodations they need because of fear of what other people might think, or because they might perceive that other people's autism is worse than theirs. You might focus on what you're not good at and ignore your strengths, or buy into the narrative that autism is something to be ashamed of, hidden, or, even worse still, cured. All this can lead to self-hatred and depression. At number 7, we have Interoception and Proprioception. When we think about the human sensory system, we often talk about the 5 senses: taste, touch, smell, hearing, seeing. But the fact is, there are 3 other sensory systems in the body that are equally important. They are the vestibular system, which handles balance and movement, the proprioceptive system, which is an awareness of where your body and body parts are in space, and the interoceptive system, which deals with what's going on inside your body. Autistic people may experience any of the body's senses with either a hyper or hypo-awareness. In the case of proprioception, many autistic people need to experience a sense of pressure or have something heavy on top of them, or even squeeze into tight spaces to help regulate their proprioceptive response. Many autistic people like to use weighted blankets to help in this way, or to wear compression clothing. I know of one autist who, as a child, needed her mum to sit on her to achieve this. Being submersed in water is another common way autistic people experience this proprioceptive reset. Interoception awareness, on the other hand, for autistic people can mean things like not knowing when you are hungry or thirsty until you're really hungry or thirsty, not realising you need to go to the toilet until it's almost too late, difficulty in understanding our emotions, not recognising things like anxiety until the anxiety becomes crippling, Some autistic people may have a hyper-awareness of some interoception aspects. An example of this might be having a hyper-awareness of your own heartbeat. Number 18, masking and unmasking. Masking or camouflaging is an autistic survival strategy. Many autistic people mask to either consciously or unconsciously blend into a neurotypical society, to avoid bullying or stigma, to succeed at a workplace, to attract a romantic partner, or to make friends. For those of us who have made it well into our adulthood, or even much later in life before realising we are autistic or receiving a diagnosis, masking is something we have done unconsciously for most of our lives. Examples of masking: copying gestures or body language, forcing eye contact, imitating facial expressions, scripting conversations and developing rehearsed responses to questions, pushing through sensory discomfort, and disguising stims. So, what are the consequences of masking? Stress and anxiety, depression, exhaustion, delayed identification of autism, loss of identity, and risk of burnout. Unmasking is the process of peeling back the layers after identifying as autistic. As a late identified autistic adult, you may not be aware of how much your true self has been hidden through masking. Some people find it takes years to unmask to find their true self after a diagnosis. For some late diagnosed autistic adults, unmasking might actually not be safe due to relationships or workplaces or other factors, and others may choose to maintain the mask because of ongoing societal barriers. This prolongs the cycle of mental health challenges faced by many autistic adults. Number 19, fawning. Fawning is both a trauma response and an attempt to maintain safety, where we abandon our own needs to serve others to avoid conflict, rejection, or exclusion. Fawning is one of the 4 basic survival instincts: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. In fawning, we adapt our behaviour to minimise the threat. We do this by appeasing or submissive behaviour. Whereas in masking, we adapt our behaviour to hide things like stims, fawning involves changing our personality, behaviour, or opinions to fit in. Fawning can lead to a difficulty setting boundaries or a difficulty in saying no. Number 20, meltdown, shutdown, freeze, and burnout. Studies have shown that the autistic brain has neurons that exhibit higher levels of connections compared to neurotypical brains. These extra connections can result in autistic people being more likely to be overwhelmed by sensory and cognitive stimuli in the environment. This overwhelm can lead to another of the basic survival responses, that of fight. In autistic people, this fight response can manifest in the form of a meltdown. A meltdown will look different in different people. Meltdowns are an uncontrolled response, not premeditated, and are not the same as a tantrum. A shutdown, on the other hand, is an internalised response to overwhelm, where the autist retreats from their surroundings in a flight response. This retreat might not necessarily be physical, but manifests as an internal retreat, and may even go unnoticed by those surrounding the autist. In a shutdown, an autistic person may be unable to communicate or be completely silent, or even be completely still and unresponsive. This more immediate version of a shutdown may be more of an example of a freeze response. In this freeze state, the autistic person may also lose memory of the event that led to the freeze reaction. Just a note here, this explanation of the freeze response is based on my thoughts alone, as it is something that seems a little unclear in the wider information resources I've found so far. If an autistic person is having to manage prolonged overwhelm, whether due to physical stimuli or stress, they may experience burnout. Autistic burnout is a longer-term response, which may last for days, weeks, months, or even longer. Burnout can cause mental and physical exhaustion, increased sensory sensitivity, cognitive overload, and difficulty with emotional regulation. Repeated meltdowns or shutdowns may be an indication of, or even a trigger for, approaching burnout. burnout can also occur as a result of long-term masking. Looking back, I now believe I had a burnout period while in my latter years of high school, where for about 6 months I needed to sleep for about 15 hours a day and could only attend school for a few hours each day after lunch. 21. Mirroring. Mirroring is a fundamental part of human social interaction involving the unconscious imitation of another person's gestures, speech patterns, or behaviours, helping people to create bonds of empathy, connection, and understanding. In the neurotypical population, mirroring happens naturally and without conscious thought, helping us to understand and predict the actions of others. Autistic individuals, however, often show a difference in mirroring ability compared to the neurotypical population. Social interaction challenges related to mirroring in autism can include difficulty in reading and responding to social cues, challenges in understanding and using nonverbal communication, reduced spontaneous imitation of others' actions and expressions, and difficulties in adapting behaviour to different social contexts. Communication difficulties related to mirroring in autism may also include challenges in understanding and using appropriate tone of voice, difficulties with turn-taking in conversations, reduced use of gestures to complement verbal communication, and challenges in interpreting and responding to others' emotional states. It's interesting to note that these differences form a key part of the diagnostic criteria for autism. At number 22, we have scripting. Scripting in autism can take on several forms, but is often used by the autistic person as a tool to help navigate conversations. It may be in the form of echolalia, where the autist repeats phrases they have heard before from other people, as a way of participating in the conversation. Scripting can also involve repeating phrases or chunks of dialogue learned from TV shows or movies. These may be because there is a link to the subject being discussed, or may be out of context entirely. Scripting can also be a tool used by an autistic person when preparing for a conversation or social interaction, to anticipate the flow of the expected conversation. This preparation helps minimise social anxiety around communication in general. For example, I script in my head conversations before pretty much any phone conversation. I would also script conversations before any exchange in a retail setting, and I have to turn off the radio well before I approach a fast food drive-through window to get my script sorted out. Expected difficult interactions may trigger extensive scripting beforehand, with every possible way the conversation might go anticipated, planned, and scripted. If the conversation then deviates from what was planned and scripted, and the intensity of the situation is high enough, a shutdown or situational mutism is a very real outcome. Number 23, neurodivergent and neurodiverse. Neurodivergent is a term used to describe someone whose neurological functionality differs from the neurotypical population. This can be due to a developmental difference, for example in autism, ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Down syndrome, and others. This may also be due to an acquired brain injury, for example stroke. Can include various types of mental health conditions such as OCD, bipolar, or anxiety disorders. And also people with intellectual disabilities. Around 20 to 25% of the population is neurodivergent. Neurodiverse, on the other hand, is a term used to describe a group, community, or society that includes people with neurological differences. For example, a marriage between an autistic person and a neurotypical person could be called a neurodiverse marriage. 24. Neurotypical, Neuronormative, and Allistic. Neurotypical is a term used to describe people whose brain functions in a way that is considered normal by society. They are individuals who are not considered neurodivergent as defined previously. Neuronormative is the assumption that there is a correct way to exist in this world, a correct way to think, act, speak, play, learn, etc. This leads to the assumption that anyone who differs from this normal is dysfunctional, defective, wrong, broken, invalid. This is where we get the outdated and demeaning term invalid. We see this in language around diagnosing people who are neurodivergent. Autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. Lastly here we have the term Allistic, which refers to anyone who is not autistic. It is different to neurotypical in that autistic people may also have other neurodivergent conditions, just not autism. 25. Situational mutism. Situational mutism is where a person who has the capacity of speech becomes unable to speak normally or not at all under certain circumstances. In a child, this may present as someone who can speak at home but not to peers or teachers, or maybe can speak to peers but not adults, or freezes when an adult or teacher asks them a question. In my case as a child, I was chatty at home but went into my shell when away from home. In an adult, this may look something like someone who becomes silent, even with a partner, in stressful interactions. This is related to the freeze response we discussed earlier. This experience of not being able to talk in stressful interactions is one that I've experienced on several occasions in my adult life. This freeze may then also progress to a full shutdown in some situations. 26. Sensory overwhelm. I've heard it said by some autistic people that the autistic sensory experience is like living life with every sense turned up to 11. By this I mean you hear, see, feel, smell, everything in your environment all at once. Take going to a wedding reception, for example. The room is full of people all talking at the same time. The band is playing. There is colour and movement in every part of your visual field. Clinking of cutlery and glassware. Sounds from the kitchen. Maybe unusual food smells, or the smell of perfume or aftershave. Someone you don't know is making an effort to talk to you, even though you don't want to talk to anyone. And you're trying to contemplate eating the food on your plate that you don't even recognise. Then someone bumps your chair. Okay, I won't keep going, but you get the idea. Now, I know everyone in the room has the same stimuli, but for the autistic person, it's like absolutely every minute sensory detail, whether important or unimportant, is being processed at the same intensity. So the people talking at the next table are just as prominent as the person next to you, or the chair scrape at the other end of the room. So this may be an obvious example of an overwhelming sensory situation. But how about this one? You are in a quiet environment and someone unexpectedly brushes past you with the lightest contact. This one might be just as overwhelming as the wedding. Sensory overwhelm can lead to significant or even severe dysregulation for the autistic person, and the result can be anything from the need to actively stim to regulate the emotional state to a full meltdown or shutdown. Number 27, parallel play. Parallel play is where children play around or near each other, but without interacting with each other. For some parents, this is where they notice that their undiagnosed autistic child is different in how they play from other kids and not joining in with other kids. Conversely, parallel play can allow an autistic child to play in proximity to other children and observe how they interact, then joining in when they feel comfortable. In adults, the concept of parallel play might look something like two people sitting on the couch watching TV together, or looking at social media on their devices. In effect, playing side by side, but not needing to interact. For adults, some sports also give this parallel play effect. For me, I took up competitive sailing, where I could compete with others, but on my own boat, by myself, concentrating on my own experience. That was great while on the water. Where I struggled was when we were back on dry land and the sailing gave way to social interactions. In fact, I was okay with that interaction while de-rigging the boat and the chat was focused on the sailing day just completed. But as soon as that moved to the clubhouse, I was out of there. Number 28, uneven productivity and spiky skill set. Many autistic people have the ability to be able to hyper-focus on some tasks. This can mean we might, for example, get a large body of work done in a short period of time. But this may come at a cost in terms of energy and fatigue, which might then lead to a period of unproductivity or the need to rest. Added to this is the executive function challenges that many autistic people face, which can lead to difficulties in planning or starting tasks. These factors can lead to periods of uneven productivity for autistic people with peaks and troughs in that productivity. Added to this is what we call Spikey Skillset, where the autistic person may have exceptional abilities in some areas but difficulties in others. An example here is the autistic schoolchild who seems to be able to complete some tasks effortlessly, but because they may fail to complete other tasks or achieve poor results in other tasks, may be labelled as lazy or not trying. The opposite example here can also be true, where an autistic person may show real struggles in areas that other peers don't, and thus are labelled as stupid or slow. There are labels and slurs that then may be directed towards the autistic person that I won't name here, but can be extremely damaging or hurtful. The most common one flung at autists is known as the R word. I'll leave that one to your imagination. Okay, so that's it for now. If you've not yet seen part 1 of this video, click on the link above to go straight to the video. If you want to find out more about what autism is, what it isn't, and why I decided to get an official autism diagnosis, please feel free to check out my 2-part video of my introduction to autism. I will leave a link to that in the video description. And remember, if you want to see more videos of my experience with autism, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.